In a quiet neighborhood in Chicago, there stood a small yellow house at the end of Maple Street. The house was old. The paint on the walls had faded, and the wooden porch creaked whenever someone stepped on it. But every evening at exactly 5 p.m., the same thing happened inside the house. An old woman would sit beside the living room window and stare down the street. Her name was Margaret Wilson. She was 84 years old. Every day, she wore the same light blue sweater and placed a small cup of tea on the table beside her chair. Then she waited. Neighbors often saw her through the window. Children riding bicycles would whisper to each other, "Why does that grandma always sit there?" No one really knew. Some people assumed she was lonely. Others thought she was simply watching the world go by. But the truth was something much deeper. Margaret wasn't just looking out the window. She was waiting for someone who had once promised to come back. A curious neighbor. One afternoon, a new family moved into the house next door. Among them was a young college student named Emma. Emma was studying journalism and loved observing people. On her first evening in the neighborhood, she noticed the old woman sitting by the window. At first, Emma didn't think much about it. But the next day, the same thing happened, and the day after that, again. Every single day. Exactly 5 p.m. The old woman sat in the same chair, staring down the street. Emma finally grew curious. One evening she baked some chocolate cookies and walked over to the yellow house. The porch creaked loudly as she stepped up to the door. She knocked. For a moment, there was silence. Then the door slowly opened. Margaret stood there with a gentle smile. "Yes." Emma held out the plate of cookies. "Eat. I just moved in next door. I thought I'd come say hello." Margaret's face lit up. "Well, that's very kind of you." She opened the door wider. "Please come in." Emma stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon and old books. Family photographs covered the walls. Emma noticed something interesting. Many of the photos showed a young boy smiling beside Margaret. "Is that your son?" Emma asked. Margaret looked at the photos and her smile softened. "Yes." "What's his name?" Margaret answered quietly. "Daniel." Emma nodded. "He looks very happy." Margaret walked slowly to the living room and sat in her chair beside the window. He was. Emma noticed something else. On the small table beside Margaret's chair, there was a second cup of tea. Not just one. Two. Emma hesitated before asking, "Are you expecting someone?" Margaret looked out the window again. "Yes." Emma waited for her to continue, but Margaret simply stared down the street. The sun was beginning to set. Finally, Emma asked softly, "Who?" Margaret's voice was almost a whisper. "My son." Emma blinked. "Oh, is he coming to visit today?" Margaret shook her head slowly. "No." Emma looked confused. "Then why do you wait every day?" Margaret took a deep breath. "Because he told me he would come home." Emma smiled. "Well, that sounds wonderful." Margaret looked at her, and something in her eyes made Emma's smile fade. Then Margaret said something unexpected. "He told me that 32 years ago." The promise. Emma sat quietly. 32 years, she asked. Margaret nodded. "My son left for the army when he was 20. Emma felt a chill. "Before he left, we sat right here by this window." Margaret touched the arm of her chair gently. He said, "Mom, don't worry. I'll come back soon." Her voice trembled slightly. "And I told him I'd be waiting." Emma whispered, "Did he come back?" Margaret looked down the empty street. The sunlight faded slowly across the pavement. "No." Emma didn't know what to say. "But I still keep my promise," Margaret added softly. Emma noticed the second cup of tea again. "Is that for him?" Margaret nodded. "Every evening." Emma's heart tightened. "Do you really believe he'll walk down that street someday?" Margaret smiled gently. "Young people think waiting is foolish." Emma shook her head. "No, I don't think that." Margaret looked back at the street. "Sometimes hope is the only thing we have left." Outside, a car drove past. For a brief moment, Margaret leaned forward slightly, as if she expected someone to step out. But the car kept driving. Emma suddenly realized something. Margaret had been doing this every day for 32 years. The first surprise. Emma continued visiting Margaret during the following weeks. They drank tea together. They talked about books, music, and memories. Margaret told beautiful stories about Daniel. He used to ride his bicycle down the street as fast as he could, she said one evening. Emma laughed. That sounds dangerous. Margaret smiled. Oh, it was. Then her smile faded slightly. But he always came home before dinner. One night, as Emma was leaving the house, she turned back and asked, Margaret, what would you do if Daniel really walked through that door tomorrow? Margaret didn't hesitate. I would make him dinner. Emma laughed softly. Just dinner? Margaret nodded. Yes. Then she added something that made Emma's heart ache. Because after 32 years, I imagine he'd be very hungry. A few weeks later, Emma wrote a small article for the local newspaper. The headline read, The Woman Who Never Stops Waiting. In the article, Emma described Margaret's quiet evening routine. She wrote about the second cup of tea. She wrote about the promise. She wrote about hope. Emma never expected the story to travel far. But something surprising happened. Within days, thousands of people read it online. Comments flooded the website. Some people wrote, Someone should visit her. Others wrote, This broke my heart. Then one comment appeared that changed everything. It said, I think I knew her son. Emma stared at the screen. Her heart began to race. Because if that comment was true, Margaret's long wait might finally be about to end.